Good evening and welcome to this episode of Cocktails with a Curator. I'm Xavier Salomon, the Peter Jay Sharp Chief Curator at the Frick Collection. Over the last couple of months, we've been looking at a number of great paintings at the Frick Collection, accompanied by great cocktails. But this evening, I would like to talk about a piece of sculpture, a three-dimensional object, arguably one of the most important pieces of sculpture at the Frick Collection, the great bronze angel by Jean Barbet. Angels are, of course, winged creatures that we all know about. Their origins go all the way back to antiquity, to biblical times, to the Old Testament. The word actually, as we know it today, comes from the Greek angelos, which means, in fact, messenger. And when we think of angels, especially in the Old Testament, they seem to be mostly messengers of God in one way or another. There are different types of angels. There are many stories associated with angels. The three most important, as we think of them, are the archangels, and the archangels have names. There is the Archangel Gabriel, who of course is the angel at the Annunciation. And here is a beautiful painting by Fra Angelico at the Museo del Prado in Madrid. There is the military Archangel Michael, who vanquishes Satan and is the angel who will weigh souls on the day of the Last Judgment. And this is another great painting by the 17th century artist Guido Reni in Rome. And finally, there is the Archangel Raphael, who is associated with a story about Tobias and the angel. And here is a painting in the National Gallery in London by Verrocchio. But there is also the concept of guardian angels. And the idea that angels guard the souls of human beings is something that is believed in Christianity, but is also something that is believed in other religions. So for example, in the Islamic Muslim world, every person has two guardian angels, one in front of you, one behind you, protecting you at all times. And this is a painting by Murillo, the Spanish painter, showing a guardian angel with the soul of a young human being. But since we're talking about angels and guardian angels, I like to think that the Barbet Angel is the guardian angel of the Frick Collection in many ways, and it presides over the collection in a very important way. And because we're talking about protection and guardian angels, I would like again to thank and raise a glass to all of those people who've been helping us out during this terrible crisis. And because of that, because the fact we're talking about angels, the cocktail this evening is something invented in the 1930s, and it is called an angel face. It is made out of equal parts of dry gin, Calvados, and apricot brandy, and you can garnish it with an apple. And I would like to raise a glass to all the doctors, nurses, hospital workers who have been tirelessly working in New York City, in America, in every country of the world, fighting this disease, curing people, helping people out. Every evening here in New York at 7 o'clock, we all thank hospital workers from our windows, clapping and banging pans. But I would like to raise a glass to them yet again for all the extraordinary work they've done and that they keep doing. Thank you. So the Barbet Angel lives in the garden court at the Frick. This is her natural habitat. And it is very beautifully placed on the left, as you see it on a column. But partly because it is in this very beautiful setting, it's often an object that people walk past without truly realizing how great it is. And I think its location currently is somewhat problematic because of this. People read it almost as a garden decoration rather than as the great work of art it is. And it truly is an extraordinary work of art. Here he is, this one great bronze figure, fairly tall, this sort of wonderful column-like shape. The body is this sort of tube with this beautiful drapery. his left hand is holding something which is missing, and we'll see that it may have been a cross, and his right hand is pointing towards something. And then you have these beautiful sort of long wings. Here again is a detail. It shows you the diadem on his forehead, the beautiful flowing effect of his robes, and the wings, which I particularly love, with these great long feathers, and the texture of those feathers is extraordinary. The angel is in fact made out of three different parts. So the body of the angel is all one piece, but the two wings are, as you can see from the slide, attached to the back of the angel. This is very much part of the way this object was created, and here you see it without the wings. And here are the two wings, which in themselves are just simply wonderful. I mean, the elegance of these wings, the sort of poetic rhythm of the feathers and how they all work together, it's something truly miraculous. The wings are important also for another reason, because the left wing on the inside part of it has an inscription, an original inscription, which tells us a lot about this object. The inscription in English tells us that on the 27th day of the month of March of the year 1475, Jean Barbet from Lyon made this angel. And in French, the last part says, Jean Barbet dit de Lyon fait cet angelo. And angelo means angelet, a little angel. It's a sort of a diminutive word for angel. The 27th of March of 1475 was actually Easter Monday. And the spelling of the year, it's also interesting, as we will see, because it doesn't actually quite say 1475. It says 1460 plus 15, which of course makes 1475. What do we know about the angel, and what do we know about the artist who made it and this inscription? Now, the angel first appears in the 19th century in this wonderful chateau in the Sarthe, the Chateau de Lude, which belonged to the Marquis de Talouet, and it's been argued that it may have been made for this castle at the very beginning. It used to sit at the bottom of the staircase, at least in the 19th century, in this beautiful entrance hall of the castle. And there you see it on top of this pillar. Here is another detail. Now, of course, what is in the Chateau de Lude now is a copy of the angel holding this cross. And interestingly enough, the cross is the original cross that went with the angel, but for some reason, when the angel was sold, the cross remained at Lude. So at Lude, they currently have a copy of the angel, but the cross that went with it, at least in the 19th century. Analysis shows us that the cross is old, but not necessarily, and probably not original to the angel. The proportions are somewhat strange, and it doesn't seem to have gone with the angel to begin with. It may have been replacing something else that maybe was also made of a different material. The angel was lent in 1867 to the Universal Exhibition in Paris, and subsequently sold to a number of dealers, first to Wildenstein and then to Georges Hunchel. And from Hunchel, it went in 1906 to the collection of J.P. Morgan, and eventually made it to America. And it was acquired by the Frick collection, actually not by Henry Clay Frick. It's not part of the group of bronzes that Frick bought in 1916 from the heirs of J.P. Morgan after Morgan's death. It actually passed on to Morgan's son, Jack. And when Jack died, the Frick collection bought it in 1943. There was a group of objects that the Frick collection acquired in the middle of the Second World War, which included, they were all paintings. It included a Rembrandt, the Great Constable White Horse, the Goya Duke of Osuna, a Chardin, a Greuze, a Reynolds. But this group also included the angel, and the angel was the most valuable object of the entire group. Where did it come from? So was it made for Lude originally? Or was it made, and it has been argued, for the Cathedral of Le Mans, which is a cathedral nearby, very close to the Chateau of Lude? Again, unfortunately, we don't have any documentation proving this. What is interesting is that early on in the 19th century, there was a rather wonderful suggestion. And this comes from a letter which was written at the time of Morgan's acquisition of the Angel to Belle da Costa Green, who was the assistant of Morgan and his curator. And this letter came from France, and it said, please tell Miss Green in confidence that the Ange du Loud, the Angel of Loud, was found by du Sommerard among the cast-outs of the Sainte-Chapelle at the time of its restoration. And this idea that the angel comes from the Sainte-Chapelle is an idea that also goes back to family tradition in Loud, and it is documented in the family archives there. So could the angel really come from the Sainte-Chapelle? The Sainte-Chapelle is one of the most important Gothic monuments in Paris, in France. It was created in the 1230s, 1240s for King Louis of France, Louis IX, and it was a royal chapel within the what is now the Conciergerie, which at the time was the royal palace. It was designed to hold the most important relics that St. Louis had, including the crown of thorns. And the interior of this chapel, as you can see, is this extraordinary screen of sort of stained glass. It's one of the lightest, most beautiful buildings in the world. It's almost a sort of glass container for these great relics. The chapel was changed a number of times, and so it was built in the 13th century, but then it was drastically restored in the 1460s, and the roof was redone in the 1460s, which may be why the date on the wing of the angel says 1460 plus 15. So was this something that was made after the 1460s restoration, 15 years later in 1475? We don't know. Here is a 15th century depiction of the Sainte-Chapelle. This is in the month of June of the fantastic manuscript, the Traits Richeurs of the Duc de Berry, which is held in the library at the Chateau of Chantilly. And here you see it again in a detail, this sort of wonderful Gothic building. But of course, we have no visual evidence that the angel was outside or inside the chapel. There is this idea that it may have been on top of one of the finials at the very top of the Sainte-Chapelle. Here is this fantastic image with this idea of this angel at the top of the Sainte-Chapelle overlooking Paris, the Ile de la Cité, and the Cathedral of Notre Dame at the back. In the 19th century, the architect Viollet-le-Duc drastically restored the Sainte-Chapelle, which had been very badly damaged, of course, during the French Revolution. And this is the time when du Sommerard, who was the director of the Musée de Cluny in the 1840s, claimed that this angel, the bronze angel at the Frick, had come from the Sainte-Chapelle. Now, we don't know this. We cannot prove this in any way. There have been a number of studies on this extraordinary angel in recent times. The most important art historical study of the angel was done a few years ago by Stephen Scher. It's still the key article on the subject. But more recently, in the last 10 years, our previous curator of sculpture at the Frick, Denise Allen, and our conservator, Julia Day, also worked very on a very important study on this angel, as we will see. And more recently, even our curatorial fellow, Emma Capron, discovered more documents about the subject. So who was Jean Barbet? Jean Barbet, who signs the subject, is documented as a canon maker in Lyon. He is known as Jean Barbet or Jean de Lyon. And the first documents appear in 1491. In 1493 and 1495, he is documented as the canonnier du roi, the canon maker of the king. And he is documented a number of times with his brother, Valentin, all the way until his death in, we think, around 1514. He's involved with a number of military commissions. He is cleaning the rust of some cannons. He's casting cannons. He is working on the fortifications of Lyon and other sites. What is interesting and puzzling is that the Jean de Lyon, the Jean Barbet that appears in the documents, appears from, as I say, 1491 to 1514, which is quite a bit later than 1475 when the angel is signed. Are we thinking of the same artist? Or maybe do we have two artists, a father and son maybe with the same name? So we could envision a Jean Barbet the elder and a Jean Barbet the younger. We don't know. Now, what is interesting about this angel is that it is an extraordinary survival. There is nothing quite like it. Bronzes of this size from France from the 15th century are unbelievably rare, if not existent, because of the French Revolution and because of all the wars in France, which saw the melting down of metalwork, substantial destruction of works of art. This is so unique and cannot be compared with really anything else we have from French sculpture. And so for a long time, there was the rumor, the suggestion that this may actually be a 19th century fake. The provenance from the Sainte-Chapelle, the fact that it never is documented before appearing miraculously in Lourdes in the 19th century, made people think that this is and could be a problematic object. So Denise Allen and Julia Day, together with colleagues in France at the Musée de l'Armée, did a very thorough technical analysis of the angel. And what they found out is that, of course, because we know that Jean Barbet was a cannon maker, the angel was actually made in a way, cast in a way that cannons were made in the 15th century in France. And so there are many direct comparisons with cannons in France at that time. And there was a fantastic exhibition a few years ago at the Musée de l'Armée in Paris, which looked at weapons from the Battle of Agincourt to Marignano, so early 16th century. And we were able to lend the angel to that show. And here you see it in a room surrounded by cannons made by Jean Barbet or around that time. And it was fascinating to think of objects that are so different from one another, like this beautifully elegant angel and a weapon of destruction like a cannon. But of course, they are connected, and this proves that the object cannot be a 19th century fake. No one in the 19th century would have known how cannons were made in the 15th century in France. And so the fact that these are consistent in the way in which they're created suggests and proves that the angel is an original from 1475. But of course, the fact that this object is signed by Jean Barbet, and that Jean Barbet was a cannon maker, if it is the Jean Barbet we're thinking of, doesn't mean that Jean Barbet is the person who designed this angel. Jean Barbet is the person who made it. And that means he's the person who casts the bronze object. And this is very common in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance in Europe. Often objects are signed by the caster, the person who made the bronze object, rather than the artist who designed it. So this must have been based on clay or wooden models, definitely on drawings, and the name of the artist who made it still escapes us. So this beautiful object, one of the most beautiful sculptures at the Frick, is still an orphan in a way. We don't know who is the artistic mind who envisioned it, and we still don't know if it really was made for the Sainte-Chapelle or for somewhere else. So with this, I would like to thank you for joining me this evening and look forward to seeing you all at the next Cocktails with a Curator in a week's time. Good evening.